I'm really excited about our author tonight, Bruce Holsinger. He's author and educator. 4 previous novels include The Gifted School, The Displacements, The Invention of Fire, and A Burnable Book. He's also written many works of nonfiction, most recently on Parchment, Animals, Archives, and the Making of Culture, from Herodotus to the Digital Age. I can never say Herodotus well, but it's pretty good. He's also, his essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times and the Vanity Fair and many other publications. He's also editor of a quarterly journal, New Literary History, and a frequent instructor at Writer's House in Charlottesville. He joins us from Charlottesville as an English teacher at the University of Virginia and a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship. Tonight, he's here to talk to us about his most recent book, Culpability, which is a work of fiction, came out in July, and was the 116th Oprah book pick in 2025. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you. I know as it's been a busy year for you, right?
Very busy, yeah.
Every time I talked to Bruce, he was in Alabama, he was talking somewhere, and I can imagine just what kind of busyness it's been this year.
Yeah, it has. It's been overwhelming, but wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to go right to the Oprah book pick because that's where I go. But beyond the little sticker that happens on the book, what does that mean to you as an author to be picked by Oprah as a featured book pick?
Yeah, well, it came out of the blue, and my novel was supposed to publish in October of last year. And in May, my editor called me and said, look, we need to talk about something. And I was very worried, and she said, we may have to bump your publication date by a couple of months. And I was freaking out. I was with a new publisher that I hadn't worked with before, and my agent was freaking out. And they weren't allowed to tell me until it was actually until I got the call from her. So I was up in D.C. She called me just out of the blue. Oprah called me. I'm in a hotel room, literally ironing a shirt, and my publicist had pulled a trick on me. Because they knew at the publisher, but they weren't allowed to tell me. And they pretended that we were having this publicity meeting on Zoom. And a few minutes before, they said, the Zoom's not working. You're going to get a call instead. It'll be from a number you don't recognize. And I said, okay, fine. And I'm still really pissed off because they're changing around things. And I pick up the phone, and there's this voice. And it says, Bruce. And I said, yes. And the voice says, Oprah Winfrey here. And I just, my hands start shaking, and she said, do you want to know why I'm calling? And I said, you're going to have to tell me, which is like the lamest response. And she says, well, I'm calling about culpability. And she sings the title, and then I don't remember the rest of the conversation. So that's what it was like. Yeah. But seriously, the tale of it, it's been this incredible whirlwind, and there were 100 books published last summer that could have been her summer pick, but so I just feel very lucky.
It's a huge honor.
Yeah.
And have you had any weird reactions? I mean, in the process of, when you say I was an Oprah book pick, any weird reactions?
Not really, no. Yeah, from my family, my wife was incredulous. She said, what? No, you're not. Oh, come on. Are you sure? Are you sure it was her? So.
Well, I will have to say that, like, reading this book, I'm typically writing my notes, writing my questions, and I had to slow myself down because it really is such a page turner. And she says something about riveting to the final shocking sentence. Yes. That's phenomenal, I think. And
couldn't pay for that blurb. Yeah.
That's important. Can you give us, I recently watched like a Simon & Schuster where they had authors give, I just want a question here in the audience of how many people who have read the book?
Oh, good.
Okay, good. So for those folks who did not raise their hand, I'm going to ask you that question that can you give us a 1 or 2 sentence synopsis about your book?
Yeah, sure. So Culpability it's a kind of dark, suspenseful family drama. And it begins when a family of 5 is driving over to the eastern shore of Delaware for a soccer tournament, or for a lacrosse tournament, rather. And they get in this really awful accident. And the 2 people in the oncoming car are killed. And the son, Charlie, is in the driver's seat. His dad, Noah, is next to him. And but Charlie isn't really driving the car. It's a self-driving car. It's a car in autonomous mode. And so they get into this awful accident, and the whole rest of the book is trying to think about who is responsible for the accident and why. In some ways, it's a little bit like a closed room mystery in that way. It's really thinking about moral responsibility in the age of artificial intelligence. Who's driving the car? What's driving the car? Who's responsible for the calamity that this family faces?
And that's a huge topic that obviously is a hot topic in our world right now of artificial intelligence and our responsibility. I guess my question to you is what level, where would you put yourself on the scale on technologically savvy? You know,
way down the scale. Yeah. You couldn't get much further down the scale, I think, on tech savvy. But in order to write the book, I did have to learn an awful lot. And so I'm an academic. My day job is I'm an English professor at the University of Virginia. So I'm often researching kind of very obscure academic topics to write my academic work. And that's a deep sort of research that you do when you're doing that level of scholarship. But when I'm writing fiction, I wouldn't call it a shallower sort of research, but it's much broader on a lot of different topics. And so to learn about AI, I did a lot of interviews with people in the industry, both people working in tech, people working in automation, also ethicists. I talked to a lot of philosophers, a friend of mine in the law school who works on what's called algorithmic injustice, and listened to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of legal cases about chatbots because there's one strand of the plot that involves that. So I was kind of all over the place, but talking to people in the industry, I don't know if anyone here is involved in the tech industry in that way, but I learned that people working in the AI space or the many AI spaces, everybody has a PDOOM number. Your PDOOM number is the percentage chance you think AI will doom all of us, right? And so I met people who say, oh, I'm only at about a 3. Some people said, I'm at about a 15. Last week, I was only a 10. So just this sense of overall anxiety, even within the industry. And I think that oscillates, it changes a lot, but there's a lot of techno-optimism. There's a lot of doomerism and everything in between. And I'm somewhere in between, I suppose. Yeah.
And yet you bring us this great, compelling fiction that allows us to look at it in another lens. And your main character, Lorelei, is an expert in culpability of artificial intelligence or looking at that. And I that struck me. You've got that integrated within the book so that you're getting this in-depth nonfiction assessment of where we're at, as well as a real life experience. The book starts with this, so I'm not giving anything away for those of you who haven't raised your hand, but the book starts with this conversation, or this thought, the reflection of the husband, Noah, who is thinking about the success of the family and how great they are, but how different these two are in their marriage. And he goes to his wife and asks her, why do we work? How does this work?
Yeah, he's a little bit smug. Yeah.
And her response is incredible.
Yeah, her response is, why does it, Noah is the narrator of the book. He's kind of a mid-level corporate lawyer, perfectly good at his job. But Lorelei is a world-class expert in the field of ethical AI. She has a double PhD from the University of Chicago. They met in Chicago when she was doing her doctoral work. He was in law school at DePaul. As he says to his family, it's not even the third best law school in Chicago. So he's very aware of their status difference, right? And he's very anxious about it. And so he's wondering, why does it work? Why did it work out for us? I just, it just seems like magic. And Lorelei says, well, a family is like an algorithm, right? It works. I can't remember the exact paragraph, but it's inputs and outputs. There are constants, there are variables, but somehow it all hums along in this somewhat predictable way. And so the whole novel, in many ways, is about shattering that illusion that Lorelei has. But she's very dedicated to it, and we see, even the epigraph to the novel comes from a excerpt from a book that Lorelei writes. So she didn't really, it's not a real book. I wrote a bunch of passages from her book. It's called Silicon Souls on the Culpability of Artificial Minds. And we get little excerpts from it as we go along that kind of add to the haunting tone of the book, or what I wanted to do with that.
And then it ends that first chapter, and I'm not with until it's not.
Yeah. And
I love the interior design of this book. I spoke to you about that. Yeah. There's something, it doesn't have to be focused in fiction, but then the chapter is titled Glitch.
Yeah.
And so you're in for something in the next chapter.
Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about that glitch, but what was that family, in that process, like right before the glitch?
Yeah. So, the book didn't start out being about AI at all. It was a very analog book. It was a thought experiment. I wanted this family, it's a family of 5. They're in a minivan. And the original premise of the book was they have this awful accident, and everybody is responsible in some way for the accident. And it's about how they get through that, how they manage it, how they cope with it, how it affects their relationships, how it affects their marriage between Noah and Lorelei, and what it means for them. And it was only when I was on a second revision that I started layering in the self-driving car. I thought that could be an interesting sort of twist, something that I could do with the original premise. And so it ended up, I think, working more organically. It's not a techie novel. It's not a sci-fi thriller. It's not futuristic. It's not dystopian. It takes place very much in our moment. It's exactly, there's nothing technological in the book that doesn't exist right now. And even somewhat at the frontiers of technology, but it's right now and it's our moment. And that was important for me.
I just quick survey again of how many people have autonomous cars in this audience. Anybody?
Not autonomous cars, but cars that you can switch really quickly.
Something like an autonomous feature?
Or here's another question. Has anyone been in a Waymo? Those self-driving taxis. Okay, good. Yeah.
It totally freaks me out. Yeah. So that idea of, I think, introducing that into this family dynamic, you've got so much underlying this story, but then throw in the AI component, and we're asking ourselves some really important questions.
Yeah. And it's not a book about autonomous cars. It's not auto fiction, I guess you could say. It's very much about the way these machines and these new kinds of intelligences and awarenesses, and I think of them as beings in many ways, these new sorts of agencies that are not ours, are intersecting with our lives in so many ways. So autonomous automation, chatbots, all these kinds of underlying technologies that we're not even aware of, that are using algorithms, machine learning, and all big data, all these other kind of churns to insert themselves into our lives in various ways.
I think the question in the accident, which killed 2 people and left the family injured, and obviously injured in many ways, is if AI had been fully engaged, would the outcome have been different? Would there not have been Charlie grabbed the wheel and
Right.
took over. So would AI have changed that? Would it have been able to stop an accident?
Yeah, and we don't want to give any spoilers away, but if AI had sort of, if the machine inside the vehicle had not allowed humans to wrest control from it, right? So it's posing that problem for all of us, I think.
And then we get further down that pike of, you know, is that life of the family more important than the two older people who died?
Yeah, exactly. And Noah makes those calculations in the way an actuary might, right? Like, you know, and this is a big part of insurance. And there's another part of my research. You know, if you're in an accident and someone who is 8 years old is killed, your liability will be in part determined by the number of years that person is projected to live. Whereas an elderly person might not have as much play in that calculation. Yeah.
It brings up a whole nother thought of how philosophers and the questions we've been asking since we've been able to ask questions of what constitutes important.
Yeah. But I don't want to give the impression still, too, that the novel is just a think piece, right? It's not an op-ed about AI. It's about a family. It's a very messy family going through some things. The mom and dad fight all the time, or not all the time, but they're struggling through this crisis. The kids are really, I worked a lot on their sibling rivalry and their relationships to each other. So in some ways, the way the novel has been taken up, because it's so focused on this issue of AI, it's it can take away a little bit from the family drama, which is what I'm always obsessed with.
Yeah. And I was thinking you might be incredibly tired of talking about AI at this point.
Not at all. No. Yeah.
But
I know what I've gotten myself into.
The underlying piece of parenting, and parenting in a world where we have all these technological devices, but just parenting in general, teenagers, and how we want to protect them. How much of your own, you're a parent, as well as you're dealing with parents at UVA who, these are college students. You know, how much of what the book is asking us is reflected in your experiences?
Yeah, so my last three novels and the one that I'm working on now are really all about parenting, and these different autobiographical strands will come into them in different ways. So one of my books, The Gifted School, was about pushy parents trying to get their kids into a school for exceptionally gifted children. And one of the crazy parents in that book was a psycho soccer dad, I was a psycho soccer dad. So in some ways yeah. And that's why I'm always saying soccer instead of lacrosse when I'm talking about the book, because in some ways I laugh, but that book was in many ways me working out my own crazy, athlete parent psychosis. Yeah. And then the novel before this one was called The Displacements. It's about, it's a much darker novel. It's about, it imagines the world's first Category 6 hurricane and what it does to the American South. And that book was very much played to my terror as a parent about climate change and displacement and what's coming for us. And then this novel, anybody who has teenagers or grown kids and sees them constantly scrolling on their phones, and not that you're not scrolling on your phone too, right? We're all just tech addled. And so that's something that I worry about a lot. And especially with the coming of ChatGPT and large language models. And, I guess I'm worried about it just as much a teacher as a parent. So my students, I'm very worried about reading and writing and cognition in the age of AI. I'm sure there's a lot of educators here. And to see what these things are doing to those sacred processes of putting together words and sentences, paragraphs and pages that go back thousands of years in our history, that are suddenly getting just kind of evaporated by the ability of these machines to write better and better prose over the last 18 months. more and more convincing prose. There was a wonderful piece in the New Yorker, a scary piece by Wohini Vara, a former tech reporter for the Wall Street Journal, but also a novelist, where she did these kind of controlled experiments, getting writers to talk about whether they prefer human-written stories or machine-written stories. And they prefer the machine-written stories. And these are people who write, polemical screeds against AI and writing. So we are in a very dark place with this technology. I do have some hope. I do feel like it's getting students much more interested in analog forms of learning. And I think when you now do a class where you say, okay, we're only working with hard copy. We're not going to come in here and be on our computers and phones. I think students are actually thirsting for that right now. So who knows where this will go. Yeah.
I know that I have friends who are kindergarten teachers and kids can't color.
Yeah.
They're not doing the basics. So it's a question as to what...
They can't color, really?
They can't color.
Wow. All right, that's really dark.
I think it's dark.
I just spilled water on my face. I'm so upset.
In your book, you also talk about a little bit about this need we have as parents to protect and
yes,
to carve out. We try to replace our mistakes and make it better. But all these tracking devices we put on kids and this tending in other ways, how is that protecting?
Yeah, we call it helicopter parenting or snowplow parenting, which I think is appropriate for the season, where you're just trying to, clear a path for them so they won't slip on the ice, right? Lorelei Shaw, this character at the center of this book. So you're only in her point of view when you're reading little bits from her book. It's all told from her husband's point of view, but her husband is completely smitten by her. And it's really kind of a love letter to her. In some ways, the novel is. It's about her and her how enigmatic she is to her own husband, her mind, what she does with her time, her job, all these things that are just above him in many ways, but he also kind of worships at her feet. And when I was writing the book, when my wife read a second draft, she said, "You're in love with Lorelei. You love her." And
she identified with that,
she
right?
She did. Well, no, she was, it's a little put off by it. And she said, "Who is this based on?" And I had to say, "It's based on you, sweetie." It is.
That's what I'm saying. That's what you said. Yeah.
This is not on TV, right? This is not, yeah.
Well, this is a Books and Brews, and we will, as we usually do, we go to you all for questions. I know we have some readers in the audience. You'll have to try to not do too many spoilers for those who are anxious to get a copy of the book. And I have more questions too, but certainly we can, if somebody has a burning question that we have sparked.
Or even a boring question is fine.
Or a boring question. Or AI generated question. Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, if you didn't hear that, there's a section. There's, I guess, 9 or 10 sections of the book that are written as a mimicking a conversation between the middle daughter Alice and a chatbot named Blair. And so Alice it's a little bit of a spoiler, but whatever. So, Charlie and Izzy, the two outside kids, they are super charismatic, athletic. They have friends to burn. And Alice is struggling. Alice is a tween. I think she's 12, maybe going on to 13 when the book starts. And she doesn't have any friends. And soon after the accident, Noah stumbles across her texting with somebody. And he thinks, that's interesting. Who are you texting, sweetie? And she says, my friend Blair. I met her in the hospital, which is sort of true. But Blair is actually a bot, an avatar for a bot that she is interacting with on an app. And so that conversation is, that forms a spine of suspense through the novel. And Alice clearly knows something about what happened that day on the highway. And Blair is poking at her in this kind of weird, creepy way. So that's one answer to your first question is what's going on with Alice. And the woman who narrated the book, who narrated the parts of the book from Lorelai's point of view, and also this bot conversation, January Lavoie, is absolutely brilliant. So if you listen to Audible, she does such a good job.
Libro FM. We don't do Audible.
Oh, okay. Or Spotify, whatever you want. Yeah, Libro FM. My apologies. So, but then the second part of the question, was I tempted to use ChatGPT to write those parts of it? This question comes up so often. I was at an event in Santa Monica a couple of months ago, and there was a lawyer there who was telling me about the amount that AI is now being used in his firm for the searching through digital discovery. When you have 1 million documents, if you can have large language models trolling through to find things, right, and assimilate it. It doesn't mean you don't have to verify it, but it just saves you a lot of time. There were legal memos or so on early in the era of ChatGPT. There were national news stories about them making up citations, right? ChatGPT making up citations. Now, this lawyer said it's gotten much better, and his firm uses it to generate, a lot of contracts and so on. Again, they'll double check them, but it just saves a lot of time. And he looked at me and then he said, so what my question to you is, you're writing a novel. Why not generate the idea, the basic premise, ideas for some characters, but let the computer write the rest of it? Wouldn't that be much more efficient? And I just, when I get this, and I know you're not asking that question, you're asking me if I'm tempted to do it for verisimilitude. But for me, the last thing I would ever want to do when I'm writing fiction is be more efficient, right? The whole point of art is it allows you to wander into weird corners, make mistakes, slow down, be an idiot every now and then, and just enjoy the process, which can be agonizing, but which is also fulfilling. I'm not the only writer who feels this way, but I'm very worried about, what this is doing to writing. I'm a mimic when I write. I like to mimic verisimilitude. That's what fiction is, right? It's how we imitate reality. The reality I wanted to imitate, after reading a lot of chatbot conversations, I wanted to imitate it, not use it, right? So I guess that's where I come down on that question.
When you write a novel, do you know the ending or you discover the ending?
Yeah, definitely B. I discover it. So but what I do know from the beginning, I think once I get into it, I have many false starts. I've started 3 times more novels than I've published, for sure. Completed several more, I think. But I know once I'm in the rhythm of it, once I've really got what I'm going to do, I know how I want you to feel at the end of it, even if I don't quite know where it's going to go plot-wise. I'm not a plotter. I'm not a good outliner. I often write myself into corners and have to back out a little bit. So my novels tend to be kind of, this one is probably the most clearly plotted I've ever written, but they can tend to be a bit sprawling. So it's something I struggle with.
You start with the idea, but as you do your research and meet with the ethicists and other folks, does that change the trajectory of your story?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's a real clear example here. So once I kind of understood that the novel, like I said, it didn't start out being a novel that had anything to do with AI. Once I had introduced this autonomous driving issue into the book, I think we're like at the end of 2022, early in 2023, ChatGPT comes onto the scene. And I realized this is a book about the ethics of AI. That's in many ways what I'm thinking about the theme of the book. And so once I just started digging around, the thing that most shook me in my early months of research was reading about where autonomous weaponry is in military situations. And I just kept coming back to it. It had nothing to do with the novel, nothing to do with the novel. Those of you who have read the novel know now that it goes really to the heart of what the book is. You know, the way that, especially the way that Lorelei is moving through the world. I won't say any more than that. So that's something that really, that's that bit of research, looking at the frontier areas of autonomous drone swarms. There's an early on in the book, there's a fragment of congressional testimony that I wrote that I imagined, where a Senate committee is questioning a guy from the military who works with autonomous drone swarms and asking about what they're capable of. You know, the really creepy thing is they're not just getting better, they're learning from us. They're learning from our mistakes. And that, again, it shook me, and it darkened the book a lot. And it suddenly made me see into Lorelei's character in a way I hadn't before. I could give you 20 more examples of that. Another one, when I was writing The Gifted School, a much lighter book, the main character is this mom, Rose, and she is obsessed with her daughter's brain, right? Like with her daughter's intelligence. She really wants to get her into this gifted school, right? And but I couldn't figure out Rose as a character. I was having a really hard time. Like, what does she do for a living? How does she spend her time? Like, because for me, figuring out your character's profession, that's key, right? So I'm at a reception with a friend of mine at the medical school, and I'm talking to somebody, and she mentions her job, and I said, "Say that again?" And she said, "I'm a pediatric neurologist." And I said, "Oh, tell me more about that." And I'll never forget it. She said, "Oh, I just spend my day obsessing about kids' brains." And I thought, "Oh my God, you're a Rose." And so I just glommed onto her, and I'm just like, and I went and visited her lab. I interviewed her. I interviewed her postdocs and grad students. So I learned everything there was to know from a novelist's perspective about pediatric neurology, which I probably used in a few paragraphs, few pages in the book, but it gave me it kind of layered her character in a way.
Did you dedicate the book to her?
No, but she is thanked in the book. Yeah. There's one right here. Yes, ma'am.
Of
Lovely.
the two issues, Displacement, which was his earlier novel about climate change, which of the two issues, climate change or AI, do you worry about more?
Yeah, well, they're inseparable. I think they are. In fact, I'm much less worried about robots coming and killing all of us than I am about the environmental effects of data centers and the enormous kind of absorption of energy and water and so on. I think it's all part of this kind of hyper sped up kind of world that we live in. Some people would describe it as like capitalism. I don't know. It's like it's this machine, and I think AI contributes to it, and in many ways right now is justifying it. So that's kind of my happy answer to your question. Yeah. Yeah.
Question about the degradation of the English language, what you experience with students today, as well as this whole question you brought up earlier of efficiency, and how that leads us maybe to not discover things.
Yeah. I'll take the second part first, because I'm in deep sympathy with that part of your question about the browsing the card catalog. When I was writing my dissertation, there was barely a computer terminal. I would look through the card catalog and seeing the things next to, adjacent to the card that I was looking for, or going up to the shelf, to the stacks, and, browsing and seeing something next to one book on the shelf that I needed. That's in many ways a lost art now. We had this big argument when UVA was renovating its main library a few years ago about how many books would still be left, how many physical books, and so on. So that, I call it, it's the art of serendipity. And that is, for me, that's always been a huge part of research. I think there's a different kind of serendipity now, We browse the internet just like we browse a library. I think there are things to be said for that, but not at the expense of that kind of wonderful old musty sorting through books. Degradation of the English language. People have been saying that the English language has been degrading since King Alfred in the Old English period before the Norman Conquest. And I think what one person's degradation is another person's innovation and change. I study old languages, and I love to look at the way that they evolve, often from things that some would call grammatical errors, but that are ways that languages get strengthened over time. And I think people who work on the history of languages, degradation is a kind of culturally loaded word that people use when they're talking about foreign invasions and clashes and indigenous languages and so on. I like more to think of it as evolution or development or history, I guess. That's where I come down. Yeah.
Question about the leap in time from the first two books, which were Invention of Fire and A Burnable Book, which were medieval. They were set in medieval times.
Yes, they were set in late 14th century England, the England of Chaucer, Richard II, Katharine Swynford. The first one, A Burnable Book, that was my first novel, and that was about a search for a missing manuscript that contains prophecies of the deaths of England's kings. And then the second one was about the beginnings of gun violence. And so I was like the beginnings of portable gunpowder weapons in Europe. So those were, two novels that picked up on my historical period. They were published by William Morrow, an imprint of HarperCollins. And the reason that I stopped writing them is that the second one sold about 10 copies. And the publisher didn't want to work with me again on another novel. That's the real answer.
Hence the leap in time to today, right?
So that was my first exile from the world of publishing, and I went into a deep tailspin. And my agent kind of plucked me out of it and said, "What are some other ideas you have? Just get out of the Middle Ages. What are you?" And I said, "Well, I started a novel about 10 years ago about gifted kids and weird parenting." And she stopped me and said, "What? Write that one. That I can sell that one." And so she did. And so that's what got me into the contemporary world. So it was purely the contingencies and brutalities of trade publishing. That's the answer.
Good question. I love it. Yeah. Question about your motivation and appreciation for bringing awareness to mental health issues, even in those who are world experts on things like AI and in the character of Lorelei.
Yeah. Then first of all, thank you for saying that. That means a lot. And my family, those issues are in different pockets of my family that I thought about for many years. So that's an immediate answer to that question. But I wasn't really trying to surface that or foreground and make that the main theme. But it definitely helped me dig deeper on Lorelei. So Lorelei is completely obsessed with safety, right? That's her job. Her job is to build, imagine, design safe systems, safe machine-human systems and interactions. And it's her life's work. She's one of the top 5 minds in the world dealing with those questions. She thinks about them all the time. One of the reasons she thinks about them, one of her motivations, is her own psychological and crisis, I guess, these crises that she's had throughout her life with her own OCD that she struggles with, that has made her near suicidal at times, that has made her, imagine violence against her own children. So she's struggling with this. And this is based on a lot of research, a lot of conversations, what I hope is a lot of compassion, people reading those sections for me to make sure I got it right, that I was representing that community in the right way. But it was also, again, trying to create, for me, it wasn't a political message. It was a creative message, an artistic part of the craft of the novel was trying to make that character into an integrated human being. And for all of us, we all have flaws. We all have things that distinguish us from other people. Distilling that in a character is so hard, right? You don't want to make your characters generic. You don't want to make them too similar to each other. But you do want to write them all, despite their differences, into this common story that we all share, right? This story of humanity, why we're all sitting here tonight, right? Why we all read, why we share stories. And Lorelei has this, you can tell I'm totally in love with Lorelei still. Sorry. That she has this particular way of being in the world that I just, I became obsessed like Noah with telling her story, even the parts of it and imagining the parts of it that I couldn't understand. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Is it hard as a guy to write a female character?
Hard, yeah. It's I wouldn't say the difficulty is a joy and a challenge, because I've always found female friendship, right, or women's private thoughts, so much more interesting than men. I just think, it's just, sorry, but it's just I don't know. I have a lot of. I'm the youngest of four. I have two older sisters. All my best friends growing up were women, and I really like multiple points of view. And in fact, this time I had to restrain myself from writing from Lorelei's point of view. I was like, okay, I'm going to just do this first person. It's just going to be Noah telling her story. But I couldn't resist getting a little bit of her voice in there. So yeah, I find it challenging, also fun. And the best thing is when you have a beta reader. I have fellow authors we read each other's stuff. And one of the most common comments I get in the margins is, a woman would neither say this nor think this. and I live for those moments, right? And I give them back too. A man would never do this. And that's fun, yeah.
When you're writing, do you ever quit typing and dictate to the computer and let the computer do the typing?
I had tendinitis some years ago and experimented with that, but it didn't work for me. Often what I'll do is when I'm sick of typing, I will go feed the birds or play my banjo. I play clawhammer banjo, or I will go for a long walk, go to the gym, or I'll start writing in a notebook. And that actually I definitely am, I compose at the keyboard, but I do a lot of writing, kind of free writing in a notebook. And that helps free my mind up if I'm stuck. Invariably, I will. In fact, one of the best things when I'm, let's say I'm kind of stuck on a chapter and like go to bed thinking, God, I just can't figure out where this is going. I'll wake up in the morning, only turn on enough light to be able to make some coffee. And then I'll turn on a little lamp or a candle and I'll sit, and I call it writing under the wire, where you're just kind of in that slow, still, just barely caffeinated bit in the morning. And that's often when I'll do my best, not writing, but thinking. And I'll kind of work something out, and that helps me.
That feels like it's going back to the medieval
historical
fiction there.
Yeah, I study monks.
Watch out, what's going to sell?
Yeah.
What do you think? I love in this room, because we are all talk, we're, a lot of nonfiction. Why fiction as a vehicle for these kinds of topics about family and AI?
Well, being able to imagine a whole other world, being able to build a world for your readers, it's this feeling of omnipotence in some ways. There's a lot of ego in it, right? The idea that you can just make up anything you want, but just as exciting as that, I think, is the constraint. You have to be plausible. You have to, and plausibility when you're writing historical fiction, my first couple novels, that's the name of the game, right? It's not necessarily that you're writing facts, you're writing fiction, but that fiction has to be plausible, it has to be sustainable. And same with writing in our contemporary world. I like to think of my novels as imagining us right at the edge of our moment, right? with the displacements. Like, when is that first Category 6 hurricane going to come? With AI, what are these? When are we going to have 2 autonomous drone swarms fighting against each other on a battlefield? What is that going to look like, and how can I push against that edge? So for me, fiction is, fiction goes all the way back to the ancient world, and the Middle Ages had its own ways of imagining fiction and messing around with people. Like in the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer says, it's Chaucer the narrator. And remember, if you've read the Canterbury Tales, if you know this poem, it's a whole bunch of pilgrims telling their own stories. But of course, Chaucer is making up the stories that they tell. And he says, at the beginning, he says, readers, please don't blame me if these other pilgrims tell you really nasty stories, right? If they're immoral, if they're foul, if they're full of villainy. I'm only, I have to rehearse them exactly as they were told to me, or I'd be lying to you. And of course, that's a fiction in itself, because they didn't tell him stories in decasyllabic rhymed couplets, right? They didn't tell him all these elaborate rhetorical stories, but he pretends that they did. So it goes all the way back. Fictionality has always been an impulse. So,
looking back to the printing press and how that opened up to us, could AI be doing something similar and opening up a new threshold of thinking?
Yeah, it's a good analogy, and it's one that I've thought about a lot. A lot of people who are working on large language models and what they're doing to language and text are thinking about that analogy. My colleague Matthew Kirschenbaum at UVA has a word for it: textpocalypse. The amount of text being generated by large language models. And it is a really world-changing kind of technology. I study the history of manuscripts and print, so I know that transition really well. The printing press is an agent of change. The printing press, which enabled, we wouldn't have had a Protestant Reformation without it. It was a really revolutionary technology that is as nothing compared to large language models, in my view. It's like a drop in the ocean, because this is not, the printing press, you could make an argument that it changed the nature of knowledge, but it didn't change immediately the content of what was getting out. Most of what the early printers printed was stuff that was already out there in manuscript. In fact, they even mimicked manuscript writing. Like Gutenberg printed a number of his Bibles on vellum, on animal skin, parchment, in order to convince people that it was actually handwritten, that it was manuscripts. So, it was a much more gradual transition than people imagine. This feels like just a bomb. So I don't even know what the right analogy is.
So it's just lost.
Lost?
We're just losing skills. We're not going to move on to something.
No, I don't think we're just losing skills. My son is my older son works in data analysis, and he's doing like this high level risk calculation stuff. He says these things are changing my brain, and not in a bad way. They're making the whole process of my industry is transforming, and it's exciting, and he's very excited about it. There's a lot of people who are very terrified of it for good reason, but I don't think it's just loss. But I'm not qualified enough to know what it is.
But we can address it in story, right?
Yes,
we can
exactly.
read about it and ask those
That's
questions.
the answer to your question
for
about
ourselves.
fiction. Yeah.
Yes. All right, we have time for one more question here.
Yes.
Yes. When is the
goodness.
next book?
Yeah. When can I expect the next book? Yeah. So I'm slowly working on it. I've never written fiction this slowly as I'm writing it right now, simply because I've been traveling so much for this book, much more than I ever have. And so I'm constantly talking and thinking about these characters and not thinking about my new one. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. I'm about halfway through this draft. I think my guess is early 2027, something like that. Yeah.
That's not bad.
Actually, what am I saying? Early 2028. Yeah. Sorry.
A little bit further
Maybe summer
than that.
2027.
Do you want to leave us with anything beyond the fact that all of those who didn't raise their hand should be getting their copy of the book?
Well, you know what? Maybe I will. You know what I'll do is I'll leave you with Lorelei, with her.
Since you're in love with her.
Exactly, my lover. I'm going to read you a bit of hope from her. So this is, we see excerpts from her book in here, and let me just. All right, this is the last excerpt of her book that we get in the book, but no, it doesn't contain any spoilers. And this is hopeful, I think. We do the world no good when we throw up our hands and surrender to the moral frameworks of algorithms. AIs are not aliens from another world. They are things of our all too human creation. We, in turn, are their Pygmalions, responsible for their design, their function, and yes, even their beauty. If necessary, we must also be responsible for their demise, and above all, we must never shy away from acting as their equals. These new beings will only be as moral as we design them to be. Our morality, in turn, will be shaped by what we learn from them and how we adapt accordingly. Perhaps, in the near future, they might help us to be less cruel to one another, more generous and kind. Someday they might even teach us new ways to be good. But that will be up to us, not them. From Lorelei Shaw, Silicon Souls on the Culpability of Artificial Minds. Okay.
Wow. That was an amazing place to leave us. Thank you so much.